They thought silence was a sign of weakness. They thought my quiet demeanor meant I didn't have anything to say, or more importantly, anything to show. They sat there in their designer silk and Italian leather, laughing at their inside jokes, looking at my simple clothes with that pitying smile rich people save for charity cases. I just watched them. I took a sip of water. I let them dig their hole deeper and deeper. I pretended to be poor at dinner, then I opened my bank app, and everything changed. Quick pause. Now, before we walk through those double doors and I tell you exactly what happened, I need to ask you something. Have you ever been in a room where people made you feel small just so they could feel big? If you have, hit that like button right now. It helps us find each other. And if you want to see exactly how a quiet woman humbles an arrogant family, make sure you subscribe. You won't want to miss how this ends. The thing is, I didn't even want to be there. I really didn't. My stomach had been in knots since Tuesday, the moment my phone buzzed with Elena's name. Elena is my heart, my sister in spirit if not by blood. She's the kindest soul you'll ever meet, far too kind for the family she married into. She married David Aldridge, the second son, the only decent man in a pack of wolves. When she called, she didn't even have to say it. I could hear the exhaustion in her breath. Clara, she had whispered, probably hiding in her bathroom so her mother-in-law wouldn't hear. Please, it's the annual winter dinner. Mother is... She's in a mood. Lydia is worse. If I have to sit there alone while they pick apart my life, I'm going to scream. I need an ally. I need a friend. How do you say no to that? You don't. Not when you know what it's like to be an outsider. So I agreed. But I knew what I was walking into. I had met the Aldridges before, at Elena and David's wedding. I saw how they looked at my gift, a thoughtful, hand-carved wooden sculpture from an artist back home, and placed it behind the flashy silver toaster someone else had brought. I saw how they scanned my shoes, my hair, my jewelry, calculating my net worth in seconds and dismissing me just as fast. To them, I was just Clara, the friend from overseas, the one who came to America on a scholarship, the one who lived simply. They didn't know the rest. They didn't know about the nights I spent coding until my eyes burned. They didn't know about the patents. They didn't know about the sale that happened 3 months ago. The one that put my name in headlines in tech journals they would never read because they were too busy reading gossip columns. I kept that part of my life hidden. The drive to the Aldridge estate was long, winding through neighborhoods where the driveways were longer than most city blocks. When I pulled up to the gate, the iron W's and A's twisted into the metal seemed to sneer down at my car. It's a reliable car, a sedan I've had for 5 years. It runs perfectly, but parked next to the fleet of Range Rovers and Porsches in their driveway, it looked like a mistake. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment in the silence. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. I took a breath. Be polite, I told myself. Be kind. Do it for Elena. I reached for my bag and stepped out into the biting cold. I wasn't wearing designer labels. I don't believe in them. I was wearing my favorite coat, a charcoal gray wool trench. It wasn't flashy. It didn't have a gold logo stamped on the buttons. But it was vintage, hand-stitched, and incredibly warm. To me, it was practical and elegant. To them? Well, I was about to find out exactly what it was to them. I walked up the stone steps, my heels clicking a lonely rhythm against the limestone. The door was massive, dark wood polished to a mirror shine. I didn't even have to knock. It swung open before I could reach for the brass knocker. A staff member stood there, a young man, stiff and professional. He nodded to me. Good evening, madam. May I take your coat? I smiled at him, genuinely. Thank you. I began to unbutton the coat, the cold air of the foyer biting at my neck. But before the heavy wool was even off my shoulders, I heard her. Vivian Aldridge. She didn't walk, she glided. She came around the corner of the grand staircase, a glass of champagne already in her hand, diamonds glittering at her throat like ice. She was a beautiful woman, in that terrifying frozen way. Clara! She exclaimed. It was a performance, not a greeting. She swept toward me, the silk of her dress rustling like dry leaves. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough to air kiss near my cheek, but far enough not to actually touch me. Her eyes didn't meet mine, not at first. They went straight to the coat in the staff member's hands. She stared at the gray wool, her head tilting slightly to the side, like she was examining a strange insect. "Oh, look at you," she said, her voice dropping to that hushed, sympathetic tone people use at funerals. "You walked in from the cold? You're so brave." She smiled, showing perfect veneers. "I always admire that about you, Clara. You're so practical. I mean, look at this coat." She reached out and touched the fabric with the very tip of her manicured fingernail. "It's so sturdy. No frills, no fuss, just wool." There it was, the first cut. She wasn't calling it ugly. She was calling it cheap. She was saying, "You don't belong in a house where we wear cashmere and sable." I felt a flash of heat in my chest, that old instinct to defend myself. I wanted to tell her that this coat was made by a tailor in London who dressed royalty. I wanted to tell her that I could buy this house and turn it into a garage if I wanted to. But I didn't. I just smiled, that soft, unthreatening smile I've perfected over the years. "It keeps me warm, Vivian," I said gently. "That's all a coat needs to do, isn't it?" Vivian laughed, a tinkling, hollow sound. "Oh, you are just precious. That's all it needs to do. I wish I could be that simple. Come, darling, everyone is in the drawing room. Lydia was just telling us about their trip to St. Bart's. You must hear about it. I'm sure it will be fascinating for you to imagine." She turned her back on me, assuming I would follow. And I did. I walked into the drawing room, and it was like stepping onto a stage where everyone knew their lines except me. The room was golden, lit by a chandelier that probably cost more than my parents' first house. Richard, the patriarch, was standing by the fireplace, swirling a scotch. Charles and Lydia were on the velvet sofa, looking like a magazine ad for boredom. Michael, the youngest son, was scrolling on his phone, looking annoyed to be there. And in the corner, looking small and tense, was Elena. Her eyes lit up when she saw me. It was the look of a drowning woman spotting a life raft. "Clara!" Elena said, maybe a little too loudly. She stood up and hurried over, bypassing her mother-in-law to squeeze my hands. "You made it!" "I told you I would," I whispered back. "Who is this?" a voice drawled from the sofa. It was Lydia. She didn't stand up. She didn't smile. She just looked over the rim of her crystal glass, her eyes narrowing. "You remember Clara?" Elena said, her voice tightening. "My friend from the wedding?" "Oh, right," Lydia said, her tone flat. "The one with the interesting stories about the scholarship. MIT, wasn't it?" "Yes," I said politely. "That's right." Lydia turned to her husband, Charles, and gave a small conspiratorial smirk. "See, darling? I told you she'd come. It's always nice to have a mix of people at these things. Keeps us grounded." "Grounded," Charles repeated, chuckling as if she'd made a clever joke. "Yes, diversity of experience. Very noble of us." They talked about me as if I wasn't standing 3 feet away, as if I were a piece of furniture they had brought in to make the room look more authentic. I felt Elena squeeze my hand hard. She was shaking. She was angry for me. But I just squeezed back. I looked around the room, at the gold frames, the heavy curtains, the people so desperate to prove they were better than everyone else. I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. Let them talk, I thought. Let them enjoy their little jokes. I looked at the coffee table. My phone was sitting in my bag. The banking app was just a fingerprint away. But not yet. "Can I get you a drink, Clara?" Richard asked, his voice booming across the room. "We have a 20-year-old scotch or, well, perhaps a water would be more your speed." "Water is fine, thank you," I said. "Sensible." Richard nodded, winking at his son. Always sensible. I took the glass he offered. The condensation was cold against my fingers. I looked at the reflection of the room in the dark liquid. They had no idea. I took a sip, lowered the glass, and prepared myself for war. But this wasn't going to be a war of words. It was going to be a war of silence. And I was going to win. The air in the drawing room was so thick with perfume and self-importance you could almost taste it. It tasted like expensive scotch and judgment. I stood there holding my glass of water, watching them. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and realize you are the punchline to a joke you didn't hear? That was the energy. They weren't looking at me with hostility. That would have been honest. They were looking at me with fascination, like I was an exhibit at a museum, the woman who lives on a budget. Lydia was the first to really start the game. She shifted on the velvet sofa, crossing her legs. Her shoes were red-soled, sharp enough to kill a man. "So, Clara," she drawled, swirling her drink. "Elena tells us you're still in that quaint little apartment downtown, the one near the university?" I nodded, keeping my face open and pleasant. "Yes, I've been there for years. It's quiet. I like it." Lydia made a small, pained sound, like she had just stepped on a tack. "Oh, I admire that. Really. I truly do. We were just looking at a penthouse near the park, and honestly, the stress of the renovation is already giving me a migraine. The marble alone took 6 months to import from Italy." She looked at her husband, Charles, and sighed. Imagine, Charles. Imagine having Clara's freedom. Just a simple lease. No decorators, no contractors, no expectations. Charles chuckled, patting her knee. "It's a simpler life, darling. Not everyone carries the burden of maintaining a legacy." They made it sound like a disease. The burden of legacy. I took a sip of water to hide the twitch in my jaw. They weren't just bragging. They were pitying me for not having their problems. They were turning my peace into poverty. "It must be freeing," Victoria, the youngest daughter, chimed in. She was draped over an armchair, thumbing through her phone, barely looking up. "Not having to care about trends, I spent 3 hours today just trying to find a bag that matches these shoes. You probably just grab whatever, right?" She gestured vaguely at my tote bag sitting on the floor. It was leather, high quality, Italian made, but it didn't have a logo. To Victoria, it was invisible. "I like to keep things functional," I said softly. "Functional?" Victoria repeated, giggling. "That's a cute word for it." Elena made a noise in her throat, a sharp, strangled cough. She set her drink down on the coaster a little too hard. "Clara is actually incredibly busy," Elena said, her voice tight. "She works harder than anyone I know. She doesn't have time to worry about matching bags, Victoria." Vivian, the mother, clapped her hands together softly, cutting through the tension like a knife through butter. Now, Elena, don't be defensive. We're just admiring Clara's choices. It's rare to see someone so content with so little. It's almost spiritual." Spiritual. That was a new one. I caught Elena's eye. She looked like she was about to scream. I gave her a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. "Don't," I told her with my eyes. "Not yet. Because here's the thing about people like the Aldridges. They feed on reaction. If you get angry, they win. If you cry, they win. If you try to brag to prove them wrong, they laugh at you for trying too hard. The only way to win is to give them nothing." I have to pause here for a second. Is it just me, or do you have people like this in your life? People who wrap an insult in a compliment so tight you don't realize you're bleeding until 5 minutes later. I want to know where you are watching from right now. Are you in Lagos, New York, London, Texas? Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story is reaching. I have a feeling we all know an Aldridge family, no matter where we live. "Dinner is served," the staff member announced from the doorway. It was a relief, and yet a dread. Moving to the table meant we were trapped. There would be no mingling, no escaping to the bathroom. Just 2 hours of staring at each other over silver candlesticks. The dining room was vast. The table was mahogany, long enough to seat 20, but set for 8. The china was bone white with gold rims. The cutlery was heavy sterling silver, the kind that feels cold and serious in your hand. Vivian directed the seating, of course. Richard at the head, obviously. I'll take the foot. Charles and Lydia there. Michael, Victoria. Elena, you sit by David. She paused, looking at the one empty chair left. It was right in the middle, directly across from Lydia and Charles. The interrogation seat. And Clara, Vivian smiled benevolently. You sit there, right in the center, so we can all get to know you better. I sat. The chair was stiff. The napkin was stiff. The air was stiff. The first course was a soup, something green and foamy with a single scallop floating in the middle. It looked like art, not food. As the soup was served, the conversation turned predictably to travel. We're thinking of skipping the Alps this year, Richard announced, breaking his bread. It's become so crowded, too many tourists. We need something more exclusive. We could go to the private island again, Michael suggested, bored. But the Wi-Fi was trash last time. Language, Michael, Vivian scolded gently. Then Richard turned his gaze on me. His eyes were blue and watery, but sharp. And you, Clara? Any travel plans? Or are you saving up? He said, saving up with a benevolent chuckle, like it was a cute hobby, like knitting. I've been traveling a bit for work, I said. It was the truth. I had just flown back from a tech summit in Tokyo and a board meeting in Berlin, but I kept it vague. Work travel, Lydia scoffed. That doesn't count. Sitting in coach, staying in a Holiday Inn. That's not travel, that's commuting. She looked at me with faux sympathy. You know, Clara, if you ever want to see what a real vacation looks like, you should check out my Instagram. I posted a video of the villa in Tuscany. It might give you something to dream about. I felt the heat rising up my neck again. It wasn't shame, it was anger. Pure, hot anger. I thought about the villa I had just bought my parents in Kenya. I thought about the deed sitting in my safe at home. It was twice the size of whatever rental Lydia was talking about. I looked at her. I looked at her perfect hair, her smug smile, her utter confidence that she was superior to me in every way because she married a rich man, while I was just Clara. I picked up my spoon. I'll be sure to look at it, Lydia, I said, my voice steady. It's always nice to see how the other half lives. Lydia missed the irony completely. She just preened. Exactly. It's good to have aspirations. Elena dropped her spoon. It clattered loudly against the china bowl. The sound rang out like a gunshot in the quiet room. Elena? David asked, touching her arm. You okay? Elena didn't look at him. She was staring at Lydia. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin white line. She looked like a kettle about to whistle. I'm fine, Elena whispered. But she wasn't fine. I knew that look. She was done. And I knew in that moment that the peace wasn't going to last. The polite veneer was cracking. Lydia, oblivious to the danger, leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a new idea. You know, she said, looking directly at me. Speaking of aspirations, Elena mentioned you were quite the student back in the day, a real brainiac. She said the word like it was an insult. I'm sure it's fascinating, she continued, a cruel little smile playing on her lips. Tell us, Clara, what does a genius actually do with all that brain power when they, you know, don't quite make it? The room went silent. The air left the room. I set down my spoon. I looked at Elena. She was staring at me, her eyes pleading, but also fierce. She wanted me to fight. I looked back at Lydia. Is that a question, Lydia? I asked softly. Oh, just curiosity, she breezed. I mean, we hear so many stories about potential. But potential doesn't buy soup, does it? She laughed. Richard laughed. I didn't laugh. I moved my hand slowly toward my bag where my phone was resting. Not yet, a voice inside me said. Wait for it. Let them dig just a little deeper. But I knew one thing for sure. Dinner was about to get very, very expensive. The silence after Lydia's comment, potential doesn't buy soup, does it? Was the loudest thing in that magnificent dining room. It hung there, heavy and suffocating, waiting for me to break. I could see the satisfaction on Lydia's face. She thought she had won. She thought she had cornered the little quiet mouse. But I wasn't cornered. I was calculating. I looked at Elena. Her eyes were blazing, not at me, but at her in-laws. She was shaking her head slightly, begging me, through the tension, to just say something. Anything. I cleared my throat softly, forcing my voice to stay even, almost apologetic. Well, I began, making sure I sounded humble and small. It's true. I was always very focused on school. I was a child prodigy, really. I was 5, maybe 7 years ahead of my peers. I told it without any pride, just as simple facts. I spoke about growing up overseas, where opportunities were earned, not given. I talked about how I had devoured books and how numbers just made sense to me. It wasn't about being better, it was just how my brain worked. My score on the SATs, well, they had to be manually re-verified because they were technically impossible for my age. MIT flew me out for the interview, everything paid for, because they said they hadn't seen test scores like mine in a generation. I kept my voice soft, looking only at the exquisite centerpiece of white roses. I was just so grateful. All I wanted was to learn, to work hard, and to make my family proud back home. I finished, and the room was still quiet. The story was incredible, but because I delivered it with such humility, they didn't hear the magnitude of the achievement. They heard a fairy tale. Vivian gave a small, indulgent nod. Oh, that is so inspiring, Clara. A true feel-good story. The American dream, isn't it? Very sweet. Richard leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip of his expensive scotch. MIT, yes. Very respectable. Did you finish your degree? Yes, I did, I said. 2 of them, actually. Concurrently. He waved his hand dismissively. Of course. Of course. But the world is full of graduates, isn't it? The real challenge is translating that book knowledge into real-world success. They were deliberately minimizing the facts. They took my brilliant, hard-won truth and shrank it down to a footnote. I felt a quiet fury ignite inside me. It wasn't the kind of anger that makes you shout. It was the kind that makes you cold and deadly. The arrogance of people who have never had to fight for a single achievement is truly breathtaking. Elena finally spoke, her voice laced with desperation. The thing is, she cut in, staring pointedly at Lydia, Clara is one of the most brilliant people you will ever meet. She never makes excuses, and everything she has is earned. But Lydia was not interested in hearing praise. She was interested in delivering the final, definitive blow. Oh, we believe you, Elena, Lydia said smoothly, a tiny patronizing smile playing on her lips. She finally set down her wine glass and looked straight at me, her eyes empty of warmth. But that's the reality of the prodigy life, isn't it, Clara? They burn so bright in the classroom, fueled by that adrenaline of being the best. But then they hit the real world. The world where social connections matter more than your GPA. The world where luck and timing matter more than test scores. She lifted her delicate shoulders in a perfectly timed, elegant shrug. Let's be honest. Child prodigies burn bright, then burn out. It's a tragedy, really. All that potential, all that promise. And then life happens. The rest of us just carry on, building our lives slowly, steadily, while the Wonderkins are left struggling to catch up. Richard chuckled. Michael nodded, scrolling on his phone. They had convicted me, judged me, and sentenced me to a life of mediocrity, all based on the practical, simple coat I had worn and the quiet way I spoke. I felt my heart ache, not for myself, but for the principle of the thing. They had spent the last hour judging my spirit. I locked eyes with Elena. She was shaking her head again, muttering under her breath. They have no idea. They absolutely have no idea. The sommelier came around the table, pouring more wine for the Aldridges. The clink of the bottle against the crystal was the only sound. The air was so tense, I felt like if I spoke, the silver candlesticks might shatter. Lydia leaned back, satisfied, assuming the conversation about me was over. She turned to Charles to discuss the price of their new yacht, dismissing me entirely. It was too much. It was the final straw. Elena reached out beneath the table and grabbed my hand. Her grip was tight, desperate. She looked directly at me, her brown eyes filling with sudden, fierce determination. "Clara," she whispered, not caring who heard her now. "Tell them the rest. Tell them what you did with that knowledge. Tell them why you were in Tokyo." I tried to pull my hand away, shaking my head. I didn't want this confrontation. I wanted to just leave, to quietly disappear. "No, stop, Elena. You're embarrassing me," I murmured. "They are embarrassing you?" Elena hissed back, her voice low and dangerous. "No, they are embarrassing themselves. Show them the truth. Don't let them get away with judging you one more second." She looked pointedly at my bag resting next to my chair. The simple, non-designer bag, the one that was holding my phone, the one that held the secret to my billion-dollar empire. I hesitated. My breathing was shallow. This was it. The moment I had successfully avoided for years. The moment I revealed the wolf beneath the sensible sheep's clothing. I could feel every eye on the table shift back to me, sensing the high tension. The conversation about yachts had died completely. I reached for the bag. My fingers closed around the cold, smooth metal of my phone case. My heart was pounding, but my hand was steady. And then everything changed. My hand closed around my phone. My heart was pounding, yes, but the rest of me was utterly still. I could feel the electricity vibrating across the mahogany table, the immediate, animal shift in the Aldridges as they realized the conversation was no longer a joke. Elena was still holding my other hand beneath the table. Her knuckles were white, digging into my skin. "Show them, Clara. Show them what happens when a prodigy doesn't burn out," she pleaded, her voice a low, desperate hiss that only I could hear clearly. I pulled the phone from my bag. It was the latest model, sleek and powerful, but plain white. No flashy case, no diamond sticker. To them, it was just a device. "What are you doing?" Lydia asked. Her tone had lost its playful edge. It was sharp now, tinged with genuine confusion and a flicker of fear. "I'm just answering your question, Lydia," I said calmly, my voice soft as a feather, but carrying the weight of a stone. "You asked what a genius does when she doesn't quite make it. I suppose I should just show you the evidence." Vivian leaned forward, her elegant smile replaced by a worried frown. "Clara, dear, there's no need for dramatics. We were only joking." "Were you, Vivian?" I asked. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked her straight in the eye. That quiet question, devoid of anger but brimming with moral clarity, hit her harder than any shout. I unlocked the phone with my fingerprint. But before I could even open the banking app, the one with the familiar blue icon, Lydia shot out of her chair. "Stop!" she snapped. The sudden violence in her voice shattered the last remnants of polite society in that room. She reached across the table, knocking over her water glass. The crystal stem hit the mahogany with a wet, sickening thud, and water spread rapidly, soaking the exquisite white linen tablecloth. She lunged toward my phone. It was a visceral, desperate movement. She wasn't trying to stop me from insulting her. She was trying to stop the exposure of her entire family's worldview. If I was successful, Everything they believed about class and hierarchy collapsed. I was quicker. I pulled the phone back toward my chest, clutching it tight. Lydia was left hovering over the table, her silk dress glistening with the spilled water, her face crimson with rage and desperation. Richard, the patriarch, finally spoke, his voice booming with authority. Lydia, sit down. What is the meaning of this behavior? She's going to make a scene, Richard, Lydia cried, pointing a frantic finger at me. She's trying to embarrass us. She's probably just going to show us a ridiculous savings account or a fake photo. It's tacky. Elena, released from my hand, finally erupted. She slammed her palm flat on the table. It's tacky when you insult her life's work under the guise of humor, Lydia, Elena shouted, her breath coming fast. You've spent the entire night making fun of her because she chose not to wear your cheap labels. You deserve to see the truth. The argument was no longer whispered. It was loud. It was ugly. It was real. Vivian turned on Elena, her composure completely gone. How dare you speak to your cousin-in-law like that? We have been nothing but gracious to your guest. Gracious? Elena laughed, a short, bitter sound. You made fun of her sensible coat. You dismissed her MIT education as a failure because she didn't buy a house in the Hamptons at 25. That's not gracious, Mother. That's cruelty dressed in Chanel. I watched the fight swirl around me, oddly detached. I was the eye of the hurricane. The simple cashmere coat, the item that started the judgment, was now hanging silently in the foyer, an anchor to the betrayal. The Aldridges believed my worth was determined by the clothes they saw and the house they thought I should live in. I lifted the phone up slowly, bringing the screen to eye level. There will be no need for guesses, Lydia, I said, looking right through her desperation. My voice was quiet again, but final. You asked what happens when a genius succeeds. You asked if potential pays the bills. Let's look at the ledger. I heard Richard loudly command me to put the phone down. I heard David, Elena's husband, finally pipe up, sounding bewildered. Clara, please, just lower the phone. But I had already crossed the line. I tapped the blue banking icon. The Aldridges watched in horrified fascination. Lydia was still standing, panting slightly, staring at the small illuminated rectangle. The app opened instantly. It ran a quick biometric scan of my face. And then the home screen loaded. It was crisp, clean, and dominated by one very large number. The number was so enormous, so incomprehensible, that for a full 2 seconds, no one processed what they were seeing. They were too busy searching for the decimal point. But the number didn't have a decimal point in the place they expected. It was a 9-figure number, followed by the currency code, USD. The quiet in the room was absolute. It was the sound of a worldview collapsing. Lydia slowly, almost robotically, sank back into her chair. Her eyes remained locked on the phone screen in my hand. I saw Richard's jaw drop, the color draining from his face as his brain struggled to parse the zeros. And then Michael, the young son, who had been scrolling this entire time, finally lowered his phone, squinted at my screen, and whispered a single word, loud enough for all of us to hear. Wait, that's billion, not million. The gasp around the table was synchronized. The air felt thin. My simple phone, my simple background, my simple coat, none of it meant anything anymore. The truth was out. The silent war was over, and the Aldridges had just lost everything. Michael's whispered word, billion, hung in the air, heavier than the crystal chandelier above us. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a trick. It was the undeniable truth displayed in cold, hard numbers on a phone they had dismissed as too plain. Lydia was motionless. She looked like a marble statue carved mid-scream. Richard had gone pale, his entire imposing structure seeming to shrink in his chair. Vivian raised a hand to her mouth, her glittering diamonds suddenly looking gaudy and cheap next to that massive silent number. They didn't look at the money, not really. They looked at the lie they had been living. They looked at the person they had spent 2 hours mocking, only to realize she was the most powerful person in the room. The silence was excruciating. Finally, Richard broke it. His voice was gravelly, unrecognizable. How? He forced out, the word barely audible. How did you accumulate that? I lowered the phone slightly, but kept the screen visible. I looked directly at him, then swept my gaze around the table, at Charles, at Michael, at Lydia, still paralyzed. You asked if my potential paid the bills, I said softly. My voice was steady, calm. And you were right, Richard. Potential doesn't buy soup. I paused. Elena, across the table, was simply watching, a quiet smile of victory breaking through her tension. But execution does, I finished. I delivered the facts like bullet points. They were not for bragging, but for closure. I didn't burn out, Lydia. After graduating from MIT, I started a company, a tech company. Then I started a second and a third. I built and sold 10 businesses in 12 years. Clean acquisitions, dedication. Everything I have is earned. I made sure I used the word earned. I let it hang there against their history of inherited. The sheer scale of the truth silenced them. They had spent the night bragging about a leased villa and front row seats. I had just casually announced I was a self-made titan of industry. I looked at Lydia, who was staring fixedly at the expensive white tablecloth, now stained with the water she had spilled in her fit of panic. The coat she had mocked, my unassuming shoes, my simple handbag, they were all weapons now. They were proof of my moral judgment on them. You assumed you could judge me, I continued, my gaze unwavering. You judged my character by the lack of labels on my clothes. You judged my ambition by the size of my apartment. You dismissed my genius because it didn't come wrapped in flashy arrogance. I put the phone back down on the table, right next to the floral centerpiece. The screen was still illuminated, the number a constant, glaring presence. The core betrayal wasn't mine. It was theirs. They had betrayed the concept of respect. They had looked at a quietly successful black woman and assumed the ceiling of her achievement. They had made a profound, devastating mistake. Elena finally spoke, her voice laced with the quiet triumph of a friend who knows the true meaning of loyalty. Not everything is about appearances, Mother. And not everything is about inherited wealth. You saw simple, but you didn't see quality. You saw a small apartment, but you didn't see a portfolio. Vivian tried to speak, tried to retrieve the scattered pieces of her dignity. Clara, dear, we misunderstood. This is truly astonishing. We simply had no idea. I know you didn't, I replied, the finality in my voice unmistakable. I stood up, pushing my chair back slowly. The scrape of the chair legs against the floor was the only sound. I didn't need to finish the meal. I didn't need their apology. The moment was done. The lesson had been taught. I walked away from the magnificent table, leaving the billion-dollar balance glowing there for them to contemplate. And then, everything changed. Here is Act 6, the reflective aftermath and the final moral clarity. This act brings us home, concluding Clara's quiet, powerful victory and leaving the audience with a deep sense of satisfaction. I walked away from that table, and the silence followed me like a heavy velvet curtain. I didn't rush. There was no need for grand gestures or angry exits. My job was done. The lesson was delivered. I walked with the same quiet, measured pace I had used when I entered the room. But now, the ground beneath my feet felt solid, not like the glass I had been walking on earlier. As I passed the Aldridges, their eyes were fixed downward, on their plates, on the spilled water, on anything but me. The arrogance was gone. The humor had vanished. What was left was the raw, humbling reality of being utterly, deeply wrong. I saw Lydia still sitting there, her face vacant, staring at the phone I had left behind. Her expensive silk dress, splattered with water, suddenly looked flimsy. Her diamonds looked like mere shiny pebbles. It wasn't about the money, you see, not for me. It was about respect. It was about the principle that you should never, ever judge a person's heart by the price tag on their coat. I was halfway across the drawing room when I heard the frantic rustle of movement behind me. It was Elena, and David was right behind her. Clara, wait! Elena rushed up and threw her arms around me, hugging me fiercely, squeezing me so tight I could barely breathe. Oh my God, that was... I'm so sorry, but that was magnificent. She pulled back, her eyes wet with tears, not of sadness, but of relief and vindication. Thank you, Elena whispered. Thank you for doing that. I know you didn't want to, but they needed to see it. They needed the shock. David, looking utterly bewildered and deeply ashamed, stepped forward. He didn't hug me. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped. Clara, please, David said softly. I have no words. I apologize for my family, for everything they said. I looked at him, and I knew his apology was genuine. David was a good man, trapped in a golden cage. I know you do, David, I said gently, and you are the only reason I stayed as long as I did. Elena turned to him, her voice firm. You see now, David. You see why I was so upset? They judge everyone. They judge us. They judged Clara just because she didn't walk in looking like a walking billboard for their brand of snobbery. She looked back at me, her face shining. I'll bring your phone to you tomorrow. You just go. I nodded. I knew the battle was over. I walked toward the foyer where the young staff member was standing stiffly. Excuse me, I said to him, giving him a warm smile. May I have my coat back, please? He looked at me with new eyes that held a mixture of awe and embarrassment. He had witnessed the whole ugly scene from the doorway. He went immediately to the closet and retrieved the dark, simple cashmere coat. As he helped me settle the heavy, luxurious wool back onto my shoulders, the coat felt different. It felt like armor. It was no longer the simple, practical item Vivian had mocked. It was the uniform of a victor. I gave the staff member a grateful look and thanked him. He looked like he wanted to applaud. I stepped out of the Aldrich house and back into the cold night air. The cold felt sharp, clean, and real, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the lies inside. I got back into my perfectly reliable, non-branded sedan. As I pulled away from the ridiculous fortress, I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw the lights of the dining room, and I knew they were still sitting there staring at that glowing phone screen. They assumed they could judge me, but I quietly proved them wrong. Humility is the most powerful armor because it allows the other side to underestimate you completely. It allows you to watch them dig their own grave while you simply sip your water. I drove home that night with a quiet peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The peace that comes from defending your own dignity, not with noise, but with undeniable truth. I didn't need their approval, their acceptance, or their company. I had everything I needed. I had earned my quiet life. That is how the evening ended, honey. With silence, shame, and a 9-figure bank account. Tell me in the end, what do you think was the greatest tragedy of that evening? Was it the Aldridges losing face, or was it the fact that they never got to truly know the brilliant, amazing woman sitting across from them? Could you forgive them for that kind of persistent, smiling cruelty? Tell us your story in the comments.